So yeah, sure. Go on, ask me. Yeah, sure, not a problem. Okay, so yeah, Huda. So the answer to that question is that on Saturdays and Sundays we are having a makeup class, right? So okay, let me tell you this, right? Every week, and last week was a little mess, so I had some extra classes scheduled for the other students who were taking their exam in the October, November, right? So moving here onwards, right, do remember that from Monday to Friday we will have our classes. I've already mentioned 7 to 7:45, right? So there should not be any problem with that, right? In case the timing is a little off, I'll let you know in advance, but I'll try my best that this schedule stays in contact, right? But on Saturdays and Sundays when we have extra class, then do remember that for these 2 days only we will have our classes earlier than usual, right? So we will have our classes around, let's say, 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. I'm just giving you this. This is a tentative time, but this is what we will be aiming for, right? 3 to 4 p.m. So that's the thing, right? So for Saturday and Sunday, try to remember, because we'll be having a couple of extra classes. As I said, that Preet has his exams in February and March. So that's much earlier than the usual session, which is in May, June, right? So on Saturdays and Sundays, we will try to have our classes from 3 to 4. And I think this works well. We can move it a little, we can delay it a little bit as well, right? But before 3, I think it will be difficult. And right, for you as well. And for Monday to Friday, we are aiming for 7 to 7:45, right? So let's stick to this plan. And you did mention that Friday, taking a class on Friday is not a possibility for you, but then you can watch the recorded class, right? We good? Okay, so students, in today's class, we'll do a recap of what we've done in the last class. Perfect. Preet, and this timing suit you as well, right? So Monday to Friday, 7 to 7:45, and Saturday to Sunday, 3 to 4 p.m., right? Easy? Okay, so students, let's get started. So in yesterday's class, we talked about consumer equilibrium, right? Now, what is consumer equilibrium? Let's do a very quick recap. And then what we will start off today is known as producer equilibrium. And it is also quite similar to what we have already done in consumer equilibrium, right? Now, the name of this model is consumer equilibrium model or utility maximization model, right? Now, the purpose of this model is to predict how consumers allocate their spending, right? So purpose of the model is to predict how consumers allocate their income between different goods. Okay. Now this being said, right, we are trying to see that with whatever income a consumer might have, how will they decide which products to spend their money on, right? And now on the other side, we also need to know that what is the objective that a consumer wants to get out of the spending, right? So we started this at a very initial, like at the very basic level of discussion, where we said that what is the purpose of consumption? So why would anyone consume anything, buy anything, right? And the answer to that question was simple and easy, that we get pleasure out of it, right? We get some satisfaction from whatever thing we buy, consume, use, right? And so on, right? And our purpose as consumers is to maximize our utility out of that consumption that we're making, right? So we want to get highest possible level of utility, satisfaction from the available amount of income that we have, right? Income is a constraint. We can't increase it, right? Not in a certain point in time. So we will try to maximize our utility. And this is true for everyone, right? Every human being, with the available amount of income that we have. Then for the model, we said that we will make some assumptions. What are the assumptions? Income is fixed. As I said, during certain time period, income doesn't increase, doesn't decrease. It can increase and decrease, and we can account for that in our model. But for now, let's assume income is fixed. Then another assumption that we make in a model is that there are only two products that a consumer can buy, right? Because on a graph, the constraint is that we have only two x's, so we can take only two products on a diagram, on a graph, right? So we are assuming that there are only two products that a consumer can consume. Then the prices of both of these two goods is fixed, right? So whatever the price of that product is, we will assume that it's fixed for a certain time period, right? So these are just the basic assumptions. We will, even change these, like get rid of these assumptions later in the model. And I'll show you in today's class how that works. Okay. And then the fourth and the last one is that consumer spends all of his income and doesn't save anything. So why are we making this assumption? Because if a consumer has to maximize his utility, then obviously the person needs to buy as many goods and services as much he or she can. Why? Because the more the products that you buy, more the consumption you're making and more will be your satisfaction out of that, right? Is this making sense? Okay, now to make this model, I told you to make this model, we have to look at two graphs. So in this model, there are two graphs that are involved that help us predict consumer equilibrium. What are those two graphs? The first one is the budget line, right? Now, I will be showing you, my writing tab is still messing up a little bit, right? So the budget line shows you, right, that how much can you, wow. Okay, budget line shows you what is the maximum amount that you can afford with available amount of income. So what are the three pieces of information that you need to construct a budget line? What are the three pieces of information that you need to construct a budget line? You need to know, first thing that you need to know is how much is your income, right? What is the income that is available to a consumer, right? That's the first thing that you need. Then two other pieces of information that you need are the price of each of the two goods, right? So let's say you have product A and product B, right? So product A could be anything, right? I don't know, a Coke, chocolate, whatever, right? And then you have product B, right? So whatever the income is, let's say the total income of a consumer is $100, right? And the price of each unit of the good is for A. Let's say the price of each unit of the good for A is $5, right? $5. And the price of each unit of B is, let's say, $10. So with $5 being the price of A, the maximum quantity of A that you can afford with available amount of income would be simply 100 divided by 5. That gives you how much? That gives you 20 units. So the maximum quantity of A that you can buy with available income is 20. And what is this point showing you? This point shows you that you're spending all of your income on A and you're not spending anything on B, because you can see for yourself that there is no quantity of no quantity of B consumed at this point. Students, is this making sense? So we are doing a quick recap, but in the middle, if you get confused on any point, you have to tell me so that I can stop and explain you more there and then, right? And if I choose this point, this means that you're spending all of your income on B and you're not spending any quantity, you're not spending any amount on A, right? Now, if the price of A is, let's say, $10, so 100 divided by 10 would give you 10. So if you spend all of your income on buying B, you can buy maximum 10 units. Similarly, if you spend all of your income on buying A, the maximum quantity you can buy is 20 units. Easy, simple. Okay, now this is the budget line. So any point within the budget line is affordable, right? Any point on the line is also affordable, but any point outside the curve is not affordable because you don't have enough income, right? Now, for a point inside the curve, any point inside the curve shows that you're not fully using or you're not spending all of your income, right? You're saving something as well. But we have just made the assumption that a consumer wants to maximize utility and therefore he or she needs to spend all of their income, right? So they will not save anything for the later. Okay, now this being said, after the budget line, this was one graph that we need for the model. The second graph that we need for the model is the indifference curve. Now, what is indifference curve? This is very important. Indifference curve is a graph that shows consumer preferences between two things. Consumer preferences between two products, two things meaning two products, right? Now, what's the shape of the indifference curve? So indifference curve is a downward sloping line, which is bending towards the origin, right? It's a downward sloping line that is bending towards the origin. Can you see this graph over here, right? So it's a downward sloping line that's bending towards the origin. And there are three indifference curves that you can see. I'm looking at this picture on the right-hand side. So there are three indifference curves that you can see, I1, I2, and I3. Now, I1 is closest towards the origin and I3 is furthest away, right? Furthest from the origin, right? Now, what each of these are showing you, right? So let's talk about one indifference curve for now, right? Now, this is IC1, indifference curve 1. Now, point A shows you that you can consume, have a look at this, sorry. Point A shows you that you can consume 14 units of apples. On the y-axis, you might be able to read it's apples, and on the x-axis, you have bananas. So on point A, you're consuming 14 units, dozens, whatever you want to call it, of apple and 20 units of banana. When you move from A to B, Which product you are giving up on? You're moving down on the x-axis, sorry, y-axis. You're moving down on the y-axis and you're moving right on the x-axis. So moving from A to B means you have to give up on apples to buy more bananas, right? And then when you move from B to C, you again give up on apples and you buy more bananas, right? Okay. But what is true for all the points on same indifference curve? What is true for points on the same indifference curve? Have a look at this. Right? What does indifference curve show? It shows all possible bundles that yield the same level of satisfaction for the consumer. So if I ask you this question, and I think you were in the class, Huda, and Preet, you as well. So if I ask you that whether the consumer will prefer bundle A, bundle B, or bundle C, then what is your answer? For this graph, for this indifference curve, which bundle is most preferred for the consumer? What's your response? So out of these three bundles, A, B, and C, which bundle is most preferred by the consumer? Can you answer me? Right? Equal satisfaction. Huda, are you following me? Yes. So since these 3 points, these 3 bundles are on the same indifference curve, and I did tell you, on one indifference curve, let me write this down for you, right? On one indifference curve, the total utility is constant. On a given indifference curve, the total utility consumer is constant, right? So that means that no matter what point you choose on a given indifference curve, your total utility is the same. That's why it is known as indifference curve. By the way, do you know what indifferent means in English? So indifferent means that you don't have a preference, right? So sometimes you might have been in a situation when your friends ask you, should we go to McDonald's or should we go to KFC? And you're like, I'm indifferent. Now, indifferent means that you're equally good, you're equally happy, right? You don't have a preference in that. Are you getting me or not, right? So that is what indifference curve shows, that on a certain graph, all points on the same indifference curve are giving you same level of total utility. Therefore, you are indifferent. You don't have a preference. Whether you get to choose A or you get to choose B or you get to choose C, the total satisfaction that the consumer gets is the same. Okay, perfect. Now, is this clear? Is everything clear? However, if there is an indifference curve, will be equally preferred. So I've also written this down. Hence, any point on the same indifference curve will be equally preferred by the consumer. But if there are multiple indifference curves, as I was showing you over here, out of I1, I2, and I3, which of these 3 will be most preferred by the consumer? Out of I1, I2, and I3, which of these 3 indifference curves will be most preferred? Where would the consumer want to operate? I3, that's correct. Huda, did you get this? So why would a consumer prefer I3 over I2 and I1? The answer to that is simple. And the answer is, the further an indifference curve is from the origin, the indifference curve that is further away from the origin is most preferred because it allows a consumer to consume larger quantities of goods. That's the simple reason, right? So the further higher amount of utility, yes, that's correct, Preet. But the reason for that higher level of utility is the fact that you get to consume more quantities of both the goods. Students, are you following me or not, right? So the idea is, it might have been shown somewhere over here, right? Right, yeah, have a look at this. Can you see this picture? Now, if you compare point D with point C, now at point D, students, are you getting me? The points that are labeled over here. Now, point D is on this indifference curve, which is closer towards the origin, and point C is on the third indifference curve, that is the furthermost from the origin. Now, on point D, you are consuming 6 units of apples and 3 units of fish. Whereas at point C, you're consuming 10 units of apples and 5 units of fish. So bundle C has more quantities of both the goods. So doesn't this sound rational and intuitive that if you have more quantities to consume, right, you will prefer that over something when you have lesser goods and lesser quantity to consume. Is this making sense, students? Right? So any indifference curve that is further away from the origin is more preferred to the one that is closer towards the origin, because that gives you more quantities of goods to consume, and therefore it gives you higher level of total utility. I'll repeat one last time and then move forward. Out of multiple indifference curves, the consumer will prefer the most further away from the origin indifference curve, because for that curve, you can consume larger quantities of the two goods, and therefore it will give you a higher level of total utility. Easy, simple. Can we move on? Okay. Now, we'll come to the shifts in the budget line in a bit, right? Now, where the indifference curve is tangent. Now, let me show you like this. Now, this is the graph that we're talking about. Think about this, students. Now, again, on this diagram, you can see a budget line. This dark, bold, black line is the budget line, which is downward sloping. And you have three indifference curves. But two of these indifference curves are outside your affordability. Two of these indifference curves are outside your affordability, which means that with the available amount of income, you can't operate on the two indifference curves that are to the right. Yes or no? This is making sense. So where your budget line is tangent to your indifference curve, like this, that is the point of equilibrium. That's the point of equilibrium. Yes or no? Now, what will this point of equilibrium show you? This point of equilibrium will show you the quantities of the two goods that you should consume, like this. So this is the budget line, BL1, and this is IC3, indifference curve, where the two are tangent. That is showing you what quantities of the two goods should consumer use. So consumer should buy A quantities of sausages and B quantities of chicken wings. Students, is this clear? So tell me if this is clear or not. If this is clear, then move forward, right? So at this point, it shows that consumers should consume A quantities of sausages and B quantities of chicken wings, and that will give them the highest level of total, like that will give them, that will help them maximize their utility. This is making sense? Okay, now this being said, now what is true at the point of tangency? When two curves or two lines, right, are tangent to each other, their gradients are equal. Their gradients are equal. So what is a gradient, right? Even if you're not very good at maths, let me quickly tell you, gradient is the slope of the line. So gradient is a measure that shows whether the line is steep, whether the line is flat, whether the line is vertical, whether the line is horizontal. So it shows you the steepness of a line. But the simple concept is that whenever two lines are tangent, the gradient would be the same. Now think about this. Have a look at this. Now, what is the gradient of the budget line? The gradient of the budget line is negative px divided by negative py. Now, what is px and what is py? Px is the price of good on the x-axis. Like in this case, it would be the price of chicken wings, because what's good on the x-axis? Chicken wings. And what is the price of y? The price of y is basically the price of the good on the y-axis, which is sausages, right? Now, this being said, right, this was the gradient of the budget line, right? You don't need to show that how did you get this. That's not part of a syllabus, right? That's somewhere you have to learn in maths, right? So you don't need to worry about it. You just need to memorize this formula, right? That gradient of the budget line is negative px divided by py. Price of x divided by price of y with the negative sign, because it's downward sloping line. Since the line is downward sloping, that's why the gradient is always negative. Now, what is the gradient of the indifference curve? What about the gradient of this curve line, indifference curve, which we call, right? So the gradient of that curve, that indifference curve, is this, negative. Again, it's downward sloping. Whichever line is downward sloping, it has a negative gradient. Any line that's upward sloping has a positive gradient. Now, the gradient of this line, the indifference curve, is marginal utility of x. What is marginal utility of x? I'll tell you in a bit. And divided by marginal utility of y. So marginal utility of x is the additional. I always told you, whenever you come across the word marginal in economics, do remember that it means additional. So marginal utility would mean additional utility. From what? Additional satisfaction or additional utility by consuming one more unit of good. In this case, it is the good x. So additional utility from consuming one more unit of x is marginal utility of x. Any confusion so far? Anything that's not clear? Similarly, marginal utility of y is the additional utility extracted by consuming one more unit of y. Is this making sense? Students, now we will equate these two. We will equate these two formulas, right? So when we equate these two formulas, marginal utility of X divided by marginal utility of Y is equals to price of X divided by price of Y, we get this final form. What do we get? Just give me a second. Students, when we equate the gradient of budget line with the gradient of indifference curve, what do we get? We get the final form, which is known as equimarginal principle. What is that known as? That is known as equimarginal principle. So have a look at this, right? So the gradient of budget line was negative px, that's the problem, divided by price of y, right? I mean, negative px, I need to get this fixed. I will. Okay, now students, have a look at this. So the gradient of budget line was negative px divided by py, and the gradient of indifference curve was this, right? So you will just rearrange the formula, right? And then the final form that will come to you is negative will be cancelled out with each other. So there's no negative anymore. Now the final form that you get is marginal utility of x divided by price of x is equals to marginal utility of y divided by price of y. Now, what is this called? The name I've already given. This is equimarginal principle. What is that? Equimarginal principle, right? The name of this form or this formula, whatever you want to call it, is called equimarginal principle. Marginal utility of x divided by price of x is equals to marginal utility of y divided by price of y. Okay. Now, this being said, what is the significance of this? Now, at the equilibrium point where the two lines are tangent to each other, this equimarginal principle will hold true. I repeat myself, right? At the point where budget line is tangent, you do understand what tangent is. Tangent to indifference curve, the equimarginal principle holds true. Easy, fair enough. Okay, right? Okay. Now, this being said, what is this equation actually showing us? What's the use of this equation, right? What's the purpose of this equation? But before we jump to this equation, there's one concept that you need to understand, right? Now, marginal utility, we did talk about the marginal utility. Let's spend some time to understand the nature of the marginal utility, right? So, nature of marginal utility. Marginal utility, we have already discussed that it is additional utility that you get by consuming one more unit of the good, right? Now, my question to you is, and I was giving this example yesterday, if you have a pizza to eat, let's say you were feeling really hungry and you ordered yourself a pizza, right? And there are 4, 5, 6 slices in that. Now, if you're really hungry, the first slice of pizza for any human being will give him or her the highest level of satisfaction. You'll be like, oh, wow, I can eat this all day. But that is not how it happens, right? Because after one slice, you will eat the second slice, and then perhaps after the third or fourth, you might be all done, right? You might not have any more space in your stomach to eat more, right? Or you don't feel like eating more because now it's not providing you any satisfaction. Your hunger is already satisfied. Are you getting me? Same goes for a lot of other things. Sometimes you're coming home after, a hot day, right? And you feel like I will just drink the entire, tank of water, but that's not how it works, right? You drink the first glass, you feel really satisfied. You say drink the second one, it also provides you some satisfaction, but maximum after 3 glasses, your stomach is full, you can't have any more. So the nature of marginal utility is diminishing. Now, this is something that you have to understand. So let's just try to understand the same example that we were just discussing. First slice of pizza. So first slice of pizza is giving you 10 newtons of utility. And now you might be confused that why is it 10? Why is it not 100? Can I ask you this question, students? Why is it 10? Why is it not 100? By the way, another thing that I forgot to mention, that this is a very, very, very important topic from exam point of view. And that's why you might be thinking that we're going a little slow and stuff like that. It's kind of obvious, but trust me, it's not obvious. And some of the most difficult questions that examiners ask on the exam is related to this topic, right? So I want you to be absolutely 110% clear. on this, right? Now, my question to you is, if you ate the first slice of pizza, I have written the marginal utility to be 10. Now, my question to you is, why is it 10? Why can't it be 100? Why can't it be 1,000? Why can't it be a million? It can be. And the answer to that question is, it can be. Can you explain me why? Preet, Huda, can you explain me why? As long as you're showing that marginal utility is diminishing, as long as you're showing that marginal utility is diminishing, you are absolutely fine. I repeat myself, right? So let's say I did tell you that marginal utility, there's no objective way of measuring utility. There's no objective way of measuring utility, right? So I would say that I get 10 utils of utility from something, and you are saying that you get 100 utils of utility from that thing. So it doesn't mean that you get 10 times more, right? Because we cannot even compare utility across individuals. We can't compare utility across individuals. We can only compare utility for an individual between products. I'll repeat myself. You can't compare utility between individuals, because my measure of happiness can be very different from another person's measure of happiness. And it's not something that we can measure. We can't say that, okay, my income compared to your income, my age versus your age, my height versus your height. It doesn't work like that. So I cannot compare the happiness between two individuals. However, I can compare my utility between products that I consume. Absolutely clear? Is it the lemon juice that's most preferred, or is it the apple juice, or is it the mango juice, or is it the orange juice? That I can compare for myself. Similarly, the same thing someone else can do for himself or herself. Am I making sense? Please, Anuda, absolutely clear, students, right? So as long as you're showing that the marginal utility is diminishing, so first unit should have the highest number, right? So highest level of marginal utility. Then it starts to decrease gradually, right? So first unit gave you 10 utils, right? If you want to write in front of it, you may util, right? And then the second unit gave you something less, 8 utils. The third unit gave you 6, then the fourth, and then 2 utils, right? Easy, simple, good enough. Okay. Now this is known as law of diminishing marginal utility. Law of diminishing marginal utility simply states that each additional unit of good, of any good, whether that be apple, pizza. I'm just giving you examples for food, but that happens for more or less every product in the world, right? Each additional unit of the good will give you less satisfaction compared to the previous unit, just like we have shown over here. Easy. We go on this. Okay. Now comes in the main part. Right? So if I tell you, Huda, quickly look at this, because you missed this part, and then we'll move forward, right? So if you have two products, let's say this is for an individual, the T gives him 20 utils of utility, right? The T is giving this person how much satisfaction? 50 util. That's a measure of, right? And we have already spoken about it. And coffee is more preferred, and that person, according to that person, it gives him 100 utils of utility. Now, my question to you simply is, which of the two products will you consume? Which of the two products will you consume? Would you consume tea or would you consume coffee? If you already know how much utility is each unit providing you, right? So which of the two products would you prefer? Yeah. Which of the two products would you prefer? Right? You prefer coffee, right? But here's the thing. You haven't compared the prices. With that, right? And that is where the equimarginal principle comes into play. If a consumer chooses to buy coffee over tea, given the fact that coffee is giving him more utility, then according to consumer equilibrium model, this consumer is making irrational decision. Why? Because he has not considered the prices that each of these products has. Right? So think about this. Coffee is more preferred. I get it compared to tea. Perfect. But the prices are to be taken into consideration as well. So if price of tea is $2 and the price of coffee is $4.5, then what you have to do according to this equimarginal principle, you have to divide the marginal utility of this product with its respective price, and similarly the marginal utility of this product with its respective price. So 50 divided by 2 is 25 util per dollar. How much is it? 25 util per dollar. And for coffee, it would be 100 divided by 4.5, which gives you 22.2 utils per dollar. So which product is giving you more satisfaction for each dollar that you spend on it? Which product is giving you more satisfaction for each dollar that you spend on it? Definitely coffee. So in this case, according to the law of equimarginal principle, you will prefer coffee over tea. Sorry, you will prefer tea over coffee, even though tea is otherwise giving you less satisfaction. But when compared with its prices, tea is a better choice compared to coffee. Easy? Is this clear, students? Any confusion, anything that's not um, clear over here, right? So that was the significance of equimarginal principle. Right? Okay. Now today we are starting off with something very similar. Similar, but that model is completely different. That is known as producer equilibrium. Now we have just spoken about what is consumer equilibrium, and in that model we talked about how do consumers allocate their spending. Now when we move to producer equilibrium, what we are about to discuss is that how do producers decide which resources to use? How do producers decide which resources to use? Now, let me give you a simple example. I'll send you a new link, don't worry, right? So producer equilibrium is a model that predicts how a producer will allocate the investment between different resources. Now think about this. For a consumer, the main decision is what to buy, what not to buy. Listen to me carefully. For a consumer, the decision is what to buy, what not to buy. Similarly, from the producer's point of view, producer has to decide which resource to use, obviously, among a lot of other decisions as well. That's not the only decision that a producer has to make, but the producer has to think about what products to buy and what products not to, what resources to employ and what resources not to employ, right? So that is producer equilibrium. Okay, now think about this. Because resources are often substitutable, right? Let's take a simple example and see how it works. So think about a farmer. A farmer can grow the crop either doing manual work, either doing all the harvesting and whatever the different tasks are, doing it manually, or through the help of machinery like tractors, harvesters, and threshers, and whatever, I don't know, right? So the idea is, what should a producer consider to decide whether to use labor or capital? My question to you is, what should a producer consider to decide which resource to use? You have an answer to that, right? So this is the main question. What to consider when deciding which resource to use? What things should you look at? Try to imagine yourself as a businessman, as a person who's running some business, right? Producing something. Producing would be a better example in this case, right? So if you're producing a product and you have to choose between whether you should use more labor or more capital, how would you decide? Lowest cost? Okay, that's interesting. That's very interesting. What else? Low cost of resource. I agree. I 110% agree with you. Low cost should be a consideration, but there's something else that is missing. So if I say, Preet, that labor is cheaper in countries like Pakistan and India, we know because there's so much of population. But then what about the output that they produce? Can a single individual match the output that a machine can produce? Am I making sense or am I not? Right? Preet, did you get this part? So don't you think that apart from the cost, in fact, I would say this is a second thing, right? The first thing that producers consider is the output, right? Productivity, exactly, excellent. So product, right? So I will call it marginal product and I'll tell you what does that mean. So you do not need to get worried, right? So marginal product of labor, right? Okay. Now there are two things. So basically it's labor productivity or capital productivity. Let me write this down. Productivity of any given resource. Okay. Now this being said, Students, think about this. So it's, as I said, it's quite similar to what we have done in consumer equilibrium. How so? Over there, we were looking at what benefit you get out of it, of consuming a product like marginal utility, and how much you have to pay for it. Similarly, in the case of producer, the benefit that producer gets is basically the output that a resource can produce. So how much is the output that a person or a labor or a machine or whoever can produce compared to how much you're paying them? That's basically it. That's basically it, right? Now, if this is clear, we can proceed, right? Now, before we proceed, obviously we need to know what is the ultimate objective of a producer, right? So the ultimate, absolutely, very good, excellent. The ultimate objective of a producer is to maximize, is to maximize the output with available amount of investment. Now think about this. That's why I'm saying that it's very similar to consumer equilibrium, right? You are trying to maximize output. In consumer equilibrium, you were trying to maximize your benefit, utility, satisfaction. In this case, you're trying to maximize your output. Over there, what was the constraint? In consumer equilibrium, the constraint was consumer income. In this case, what's the constraint? The constraint is the investment that you have to invest. Easy, making sense? Is it too complicated? Simple, right? Okay, is to maximize the output with available amount of investment. Investment is a constraint over here, right? Amount of investment is limited, as we know, right? Okay, very nice. Let's move on. Construct producer equilibrium. To construct producer equilibrium, you need two graphs, just like you needed two graphs in consumer equilibrium. Equilibrium diagram, you need two graphs, namely isocost. I'll explain you what that is. Don't worry about it. Isocost and isocont. The language is different, otherwise everything will be the same. Now let's move to the graph and let's show you over here, right? Now think about this, students. First, let's talk about what an isocost is. Let's talk about what an isocost is. So isocost is a graph like a budget line that shows how much quantities of the two resources you can afford. How much quantity of the two resources can a producer afford, right? Now, have a look at this. So first of all, obviously you draw a simple diagram like this, right? Okay. Then think of the two resources that are normally hired in any business. What are the two resources? So that a business normally hires, obviously that's a capital and a labor, right? And oftentimes capital and labor are quite substitutable, right? You can use less of one and more of other and vice versa, right? So let's write this down as capital, right? And then you have labor on the x-axis. So units of capital and units of labor. Any confusion so far, students? Anything that you're not understanding? Now let's assume that the investment that's available for a producer to invest is $1,000. How much is the investment? Right? $1,000. Easy so far, right? Apart from this, what else do we need to know? Preet, what else do we need to know apart from this? If you are constructing an ISO cost, which shows how much can you afford, how much resources can you afford, right? And you already have the investment, what else do you need? Right, the number. But to calculate the number of labor and capital that you can hire, you need to know the price of each unit of labor, the price of each unit of labor, and the price of each unit of capital, right? So what you actually need is the price of each unit of, so I will say PL, which is the price of each unit of labor, and PK. So PK, I will tell you why we are using K and not C, I'll tell you, right? And PK, the price of those. Excellent, excellent, right? So let's say each unit of labor costs you per day $20, right? Is it making sense? And each dollar of capital costs you $40, right? Easy. Or $50 or whatever you want to assume, doesn't make any difference, right? Now, in economics, right? In economics, we often denote capital, even though capital starts with a C, we denote that with a K. So PK, right? Don't get confused. If you want to use C, even that doesn't make any difference, but I'm just telling you the notation that's generally used in economics. Okay. Now, if I choose these 2 points to make the ISO cost, so this would be point A and this would be point B, right? So at point A, the company or the producer, whoever that is. So at point A, the producer is investing all the amount on buying capital. not spending anything on labor, spending all the amount on having, spending all the amount on having capital, right? And in the case of B, you're spending all the amount in getting a labor and not any investment on capital. Okay, now think about this. What would be the value at A? Now, Preet, you already know, you guys have already seen the budget line. Quickly tell me, what is the quantity at A? What should be the quantity at A? And how did you calculate it? What should be the quantity at A? Right? So 25, what did you do? So you simply divided 1000 with the price of capital, which was 40. Investment divided by price. Excellent, right? So where should I write this down? So 40 is the maximum quantity of capital that you can afford with available investment, and with the prevailing price of capital. And the quantity of labor that you can afford meeting, yeah, I'm sending you the new link. I'm just entering the value. So 1000 divided by 20 is how much? 0 gets cancelled out, and that gives you 550. So 50 units of labor and 40 units. Is this correct? Right? Right? So 0 gets cancelled out, 2 and 5. 2 and 5. Right. No, it's not 40. It should be less than 40, but you got my point, right? So it should be less than 40, but you got my point, right? So it turns out to be this line. It turns out to be this line, right? 25. Yeah, that's what I was wondering, right? So this is the ISO cost. Now, what is this ISO cost showing you? It's showing the same concept. Any point within the curve is achievable. Any point on the line is also obtainable.